Hi everybody, this is Trevor Petrie, certified hand therapist. I am coming to you from my car today so I don't have to talk through my mask while I'm at work and keeping my face covered. Today I'm going to talk about numbness and tingling in your hands and what you can do about it, and specifically, when should you go see your doctor for help? There are three major kinds of nerve impingements that you might feel in your hand. The first one, the most common one that people mostly know about, is going to be carpal tunnel syndrome. So carpal tunnel syndrome is going to be these two fingers, your index and your middle finger, and your thumb. And specifically, really, it's the tips of those on the front that's really going to be a sign of carpal tunnel syndrome. The radial tunnel syndrome is going to be the same three fingers, but it's going to be on the back side of your hand, kind of radiating up from your wrist. And that's not always numbness and tingling. Sometimes that can be burning. Sometimes that can be a dull radiating ache that kind of runs up and down. So it could present itself in a number of ways. And the last one that's very common in the hand is going to be cubital tunnel syndrome. And actually the impingement point isn't actually in your hand, it's in your elbow, on the inside of your elbow. At what's called the cubital tunnel, but it presents itself as numbness and tingling in these two fingers. And when it gets bad, you start to notice you might get a little bit of almost like a clawing in those two fingers right there. So those are the three major signs that there might be a common nerve impingement in your hand. Now, when should you see someone about it? What can you do about it? I think we've all had a situation where we wake up, maybe we slept a little awkwardly, and our hand goes a little numb and tingly. Sometimes we can just shake it out or change our position a little bit and everything's fine. That is not a reason to panic. That's not necessarily a sign that you have carpal tunnel. You don't necessarily need to run out and buy a splint or talk to a hand therapist or a doctor at that point. That's probably just an acute impingement. It doesn't take a lot of pressure on that nerve to get it angry and upset and irritated. When you should start thinking about, okay, what should I be doing about this, is when that starts happening regularly. When it's every night you wake up at some point and it's the same area of your hand, the same two or three fingers that's going numb and tingly. That brings up another good point, is that when your hand does go numb and or tingly, think about very specifically which fingers is it. That's good information to have if you eventually do end up going to see a doctor or someone else about your issues. Our brains sort of interpret that phenomenon as our whole hand going numb. I hear it all the time. Every time someone comes in and says, well, my fingers go numb and tingly, I say, which ones? And they go, well, it's all the whole hand, really. It's not until I have them go home and think about it the next time it happens, really focus on it, that they realize that it really is more these two or three fingers, or those two or three fingers, or the back of the hand or the front of the hand. And that's really handy information to have if you do end up eventually going to see someone. It can also help you decide what you should do about it. So with carpal tunnel specifically, if these two fingers, if it's starting to happen fairly regularly at night, or if you notice that it happens when you're doing a lot of keyboarding or handwriting, wrist splints can help with that. They open up the wrist. The carpal tunnel is right there, right at the base of your palm right there. And so if you open it up, that keeps your hand out of either this position or this position, and it allows tendons that run through that carpal tunnel to glide smoothly, get any swelling and fluid out of there so that nerve doesn't get compressed as much. Sometimes that's a pretty easy way to fix the things on your own. You can just wear those, and it doesn't mean you have to have it on forever or every night for the rest of your life. Sometimes your nerve just needs a little bit of a break. You get a little inflammation in there. It keeps getting irritated over and over again. If you can give it a solid break for a couple of days where it doesn't get irritated, sometimes that's enough. Now, if it's these two fingers, you might notice that a wrist brace doesn't really help with that too much. And like I said, that's because the nerve impingement isn't actually in the wrist. It's down in the elbow. You can actually get braces or splints that help keep those elbows a little straighter at night. And you don't have to be completely straight like this, right? You don't have to be straight out, especially if you're sharing your bed with a spouse or something. You don't want to roll over and smack them in the head. But you do want to do something that keeps you out of this extreme end range where you really have that elbow flexed in tight and sleeping in like this. If you can keep out of that extreme end range, sometimes that's enough to keep that nerve from being impinged, and that's all you need to do. Radial tunnel can be a little bit trickier. Sometimes the wrist cock-ups help, sometimes they don't. Sometimes doing some nerve stretches or glides, or just curling your fist and coming down like that, so you're stretching down the back of your forearm, especially when it starts to act up. That can be enough to kind of help out with that, because you're stressing that nerve, helping it glide. That can be a little bit trickier. So if that's recurring fairly regularly, you may not need to see a doctor, but someone like myself, a hand therapist, or someone, a physical therapist that has some experience with hands, they might be able to help you out trying to figure out how to resolve those symptoms and calm that nerve down. Now, that's sort of stage one of a nerve impingement. If it's almost all the time, or more than half the time, it's constantly, you're reaching out and your fingers go numb. Every time you wake up, it's numb or tingly. At that point, you should probably really talk to your doctor about what you need to do about it. May not necessarily need surgery, but you could need to have a cortisone injection or something like that to really get the inflammation out of there as soon as possible. Regular numbness and tingling is not really something that you want to delay or mess around with, because that's sort of the stage before you're going to start developing some permanent damage to that nerve, that even if you do end up having surgery or something like that, it's not going to come back, because the filaments in that neural tube, that can kind of scar down a little bit. They don't get a chance to regrow back together, and so then you'll never get a return of that nerve if you let it progress much further than that. And so seeing a doctor at that point would be really highly recommended. You can see one earlier if it's happening regularly. I always err on the side of caution. If you have a primary care provider or something you can get into, or even just consulting with, again, like a hand therapist. In some states, physical therapists can self-refer. Getting some help trying to figure out how to get this under control before it becomes too much of an issue. Don't just ignore it. If it's more than every once in a while, I myself have some chronic cubital tunnel syndrome symptoms, but they come along once, every few weeks, maybe once a month, and it's sort of, to me, a red flag that, hey, what's going on with my health? Am I stressed out? Am I not eating right? Am I not exercising enough? That's sort of an early red flag for me that something needs to be looked in on, and I need to take care of myself. But if it's more than that, if it's more regularly, if it's every morning, definitely go see someone sooner rather than later. And if you're at all worried about it, never hesitate to go and talk to someone about that, and see what you can do. After that phase, like I said, where it's tingling, you might notice that you're starting to get a little bit of muscle wasting. So you see in my palm, I have these round parts of my palm here. It's called my thenar eminence and my hypothenar eminence, and that's just muscle bellies that move my thumb and my pinky around. If you get to the point where you start noticing that those areas are becoming flat, that's when you need to get to see someone. Especially, do not put it off any longer. That means that there is damage going on in those nerves that could potentially be irreversible at that point. So you need to stop that as quickly as possible so you can maximize your return as quickly as possible. Again, so takeaways here: if it's every once in a while, if it's just, I woke up this morning, I was a little stressed out yesterday, I slept awkwardly, my fingers were numb when I woke up, it was gone after a little bit, I honestly wouldn't worry too much about that. If it happens every once in a while. If it's once a week or once every couple of weeks, still not really a huge source of concern, but you might want to start looking into, okay, is it these fingers? Should I get a brace? Should I look into doing stretches? You can just look online, search for carpal tunnel stretches or cubital tunnel stretches or radial tunnel stretches. And make sure you're performing them in a manner that makes sense for you and doesn't hurt and doesn't irritate things. At that point, that might be a time to look into those kind of things. It wouldn't be inappropriate to talk to your doctor at that point. They won't be annoyed. They won't be exacerbated. No medical professor or professional is going to be annoyed that you're bothering them with this problem. We all, anyone in this field would much rather you come earlier when we can do something about it rather than later when it's too late to do anything about it. So at this stage of the game, stretches, maybe some splinting, look into maybe doing some contrast baths, look at is there swelling for some reason in that area. You can get help if you want, but it might be manageable just on your own or with some guidance online or something like that. That's totally reasonable. If it's happening fairly constantly, fairly regularly with specific activities, definitely at that point I would talk to your doctor. Again, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have surgery or even you have to have a cortisone injection if that's not something you're comfortable with, but it's at least worth having the conversation at that point. And then if it progresses past that, yes, don't wait, don't pass go, collect $200, any of that. Get to a doctor as soon as you can if you've noticed it's all the time, constant, you have constant numbness, especially if you start noticing that your fingers are starting to curl, or if you start getting muscle wasting. Absolutely, 100%, I would speak to a doctor about what your next steps are and get that done as soon as possible. Hopefully that helped give you some ideas as to what your numbness and tingling you have in your hands are. Those are the common nerve impingements. Obviously, there's other things that might be going on. Diabetic neuropathies, you could have impingements in your neck and your shoulder that might be causing a problem, which is if you have radiating symptoms that go up your arm, that's usually a sign that something's going on in your shoulder or neck. But the rules tend to be the same. If there's numbness and tingling somewhere and it's a one-time thing or it happens very occasionally, no need to worry. See what you can do. Maybe do some stretches, but do not wait too long to go talk to someone and get some help. All right. Thank you very much. Stay healthy.